Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. Before we begin, get a little more comfortable. Pull the blanket closer, dim the lights. Because tonight we're going back to a time when comfort wasn't adjustable and sleep itself was a risk. Let me ask you something. What if winter didn't last 3 months, but 6? What if the cold wasn't an inconvenience, but a predator? In the deepest reaches of the north, temperatures once plunged to a staggering minus 71 degrees Celsius. But what does 71 actually do to a human body? At that temperature, the air doesn't just feel cold, nerves scream, then go numb. Exposed skin can freeze in under 60 seconds. Mercury turns to solid metal. Your very breath doesn't just mist, it crystallizes instantly with a soft metallic tinkling sound. Silence doesn't just exist, it cracks. In a world like that, waking up the next morning was never a guarantee. This wasn't a nightmare. It was real life for generations of Native Americans across the far north. Not the Hollywood images, not romantic fireside stories. The truth was harsher, yet somehow more human. Long before modern gear, before insulation or thermometers, they mastered the art of the winter survival skill, a set of techniques so precise they feel almost unreal today. Shelters that turned snow into warmth, clothing that outperformed modern designs, food preserved for years, sleep engineered to keep you alive. And here's the quiet question beneath it all. If they could find rest in a world where the air itself was lethal, what might we learn about sleep tonight? If this helps you unwind, feel free to like and subscribe, only if it truly helps. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now let your breathing slow. The modern world can wait. The snow is falling. The night is long, and we're just beginning. The sun disappears early here. Not gradually, not with the lingering twilight you might know from gentler latitudes, but abruptly, as if someone simply turned off a lamp. One moment, there's a low band of amber light on the western horizon, painting the endless snow in shades of rose and gold. The next moment, nothing. Just darkness, absolute and complete, pressing in from all sides, like something physical, something with weight. You're standing at the edge of a Lakota winter camp, in what will one day be called South Dakota, though that name means nothing here in this year that might be 1680 or 1750, or perhaps even earlier. Time moves differently in winter, slower, thicker, like cold honey. The only markers are the moon's phases and the depth of snow. And tonight, the moon is barely a silver whisper behind racing clouds. The cold hits you like a wall. Not the cold of a chilly autumn evening or even a harsh modern winter. This is cold that has texture, cold that feels almost alive in its hostility. It's 38 degrees below zero, and that's before the wind chill. When the wind picks up, as it always does after sunset on these plains, it will feel closer to 60 below. Cold enough that spit freezes before it hits the ground. Cold enough that taking a full breath sears your lungs like fire, which seems like a cruel joke from nature. Cold enough that the snow beneath your feet doesn't crunch. It squeaks crystals so frozen, they've gone beyond crunching to something sharper, something that sounds almost like screaming. In this absolute zero of the soul, your senses begin to lie to you. Look out toward the horizon, if you can keep your eyes open against the stinging frost, and you'll see the ice fog. At 71 degrees below, the air is no longer transparent. It's a thick diamond dust soup of suspended crystals. It bends the starlight into ghost lights and pale halos, creating a shimmering, deceptive world that only the wolves truly understand. To a wolf, the cold has a color, a sharp electric blue that vibrates in the lungs. You can almost see their breath from miles away, not as simple steam, but as heavy white plumes that hang in the frozen air like pillars of marble, marking their path through the void. This is the ultimate sensory contrast. The sky is screaming with silent, crystalline light, while the earth below has surrendered to a stillness so heavy it feels like stone. In this world, the flicker of a distant fire isn't just a light. It's a puncture wound in the fabric of an icy, indifferent universe. Around you, a dozen teepees rise from the snow like pale ghosts. They're not the clean, white, romantic structures you might imagine from photographs and paintings. These are lived-in homes, their lower portions darkened by smoke and weather, their buffalo hide covers showing patches and repairs, the careful stitching of women who knew that every gap meant death. Each teepee leans slightly away from the prevailing northwest wind, not by accident, but by careful design, generations of knowledge embedded in their very positioning. Smoke rises from the top of each dwelling, but not much. Just thin streams barely visible against the darkening sky. This isn't the roaring fire you'd want on such a night. It can't be. Wood is precious here on the plains, and the smoke hole must stay mostly open, or the occupants inside will suffocate. It's a delicate balance, one of thousands that winter demanded. Too much fire means too much smoke. Too little fire means freezing. The margin for error is measured in degrees, in breaths, in heartbeats. A dog barks somewhere in the camp, then falls silent. Even the animals know to conserve energy when the temperature drops like this. Movement means burning calories. Burned calories mean needing more food. And food even with the fall hunt completed, even with parfleches full of pemmican and dried berries. Food is always measured against the unknown length of winter. Will spring come in 4 months? 5, 6? No one knows for certain, so every bite must be calculated, rationed, made to stretch just a little further than seems possible. You can hear the wind now building from the northwest. It starts as a whisper across the frozen prairie, a sound like sand sliding down glass. Then it grows, gathering strength as it races across 200 miles of nothing but flat, frozen emptiness. When it hits the camp, it's like a living thing searching for gaps, probing for weakness, trying to steal what little warmth exists. The tipi covers snap and pop. The bare branches of a few cottonwood trees by the distant creek click together like bones. Snow begins to lift from the ground, not fresh snow falling, but old snow rising, creating a ground blizzard that turns the world into a white void even in the darkness. Somewhere, a baby cries, the sound muffled by layers of hide and fur. The crying stops quickly. Good. In a winter camp, warmth is shared, and disturbing the sleep of others means disturbing the fragile ecosystem of survival. Everyone must rest when they can. Everyone must conserve their strength. The baby has been soothed, probably at its mother's breast, probably already wrapped back into the cocoon of furs and family warmth that will keep it alive through the night. This is the threshold moment, the transition from day to night that happened every single winter evening for thousands of years. The moment when the already difficult business of staying alive became even harder. Because night in a northern winter wasn't just dark. It was a test, a trial, a crucible that separated the prepared from the unprepared, the knowledgeable from the ignorant, the fortunate from the unlucky. Inside those Tipes families are settling in for the long darkness. 14, 16 hours of night stretching ahead. No electric lights to push back the shadows. No central heating to maintain a comfortable 70 degrees. No grocery stores if the food runs out. No emergency services if something goes wrong. Just knowledge preparation community and the thin barrier of buffalo hide between survival and oblivion. The wind gusts harder. The temperature continues its relentless drop. The darkness deepens until even the tipis are barely visible, just slightly paler suggestions against the black prairie night. It's time to go inside. Time to see how a people with no written language, no metallurgy, no modern technology of any kind managed to survive and even thrive in conditions that would kill most modern humans in a matter of hours. Time to learn what our ancestors knew about the cold, about community, about the fierce, quiet strength required to face down winter and emerge alive on the other side. The entrance flap of the nearest tipi lifts slightly. Firelight flickers from within, warm and orange, and impossibly inviting. A hand gestures. You're being welcomed in from the cold. In this time, in this place, that simple gesture might just have saved your life. Shall we? The first thing that hits you is the smell. Not unpleasant, but overwhelming in its unfamiliarity. Smoke, yes, but not the clean smoke of a campfire. This is smoke that has soaked into every surface, into buffalo hide and human hair, and the very air itself. Mixed with it is the rich, musky scent of animal fur, both from the robes people wear and from the teepee cover itself. There's the sharper tang of human bodies in close quarters, wood smoke unable to fully mask the reality of people who might not bathe for months at a time because water is frozen and exposing skin means death. And underneath it all, something warming, almost comforting in its way, the smell of food, of rendered fat, of meat and marrow, and the sustaining richness that keeps people alive. Your eyes adjust slowly. The teepee is about 16 feet across, larger than you might expect, but feeling smaller because of how the space is used. The fire burns in a shallow pit at the very center, not much more than a foot across. It's not the roaring blaze you'd expect on a night this cold. Instead, it's a carefully tended collection of coals, with just a few small sticks arranged in a precise pattern, generating maximum heat, with minimum wood consumption and, crucially, minimum smoke. This is engineering pure and simple, developed over millennia. The teepa's conical shape creates a natural draft, pulling fresh air in from the bottom and channeling smoke up and out through the opening at the top. But that opening must be carefully managed with two external flaps that can be adjusted with poles from inside changing position based on wind direction. Get it wrong, and smoke fills the space, suffocating everyone. Get it right, and the air stays surprisingly clear. The fire draws perfectly, and what little warmth exists concentrates exactly where it's needed most. Around the fire's perimeter, the space is organized with the precision of a ship's cabin, because like a ship, this is a self-contained world where every inch matters. The outer edge near the teepee wall is coldest. This is storage space. Pa Fletcher's rawhide containers are stacked here, containing everything from dried meat to sacred objects. Riding gear, hunting equipment tools. Everything has its place, because confusion in the dark could mean death. Moving inward, there's a ring of insulation. And here's where winter survival skill becomes poetry. The occupants have created an inner wall suspended from the tipi's frame, hanging down about 5 or 6 feet. This inner liner, called an ozan, is typically made from buffalo hide, the hair side facing in. But here's the genius. There's a gap between this liner and the outer teepee cover, creating an insulating airspace. The liner also extends below ground level and is held down by stones or stakes, preventing cold air from seeping up from below. The effect is remarkable. Outside, it's pushing 40 below. Against the outer teepee cover, perhaps 20 below. In the air gap between liner and cover, maybe 10 below. But in the living space inside the liner with the fire and the body heat of 7 people, it's hovering just above freezing. Still cold by modern standards, but survivable. The difference between life and death, created by nothing more than understanding how air moves and heat escapes. The bedding is arranged in a circle around the fire, each sleeping space carefully positioned. The place of honor directly opposite the door belongs to the elder of the family, a grandfather whose weathered face tells of perhaps 60 winters survived, which makes him ancient by the standards of this time and place. To his right and left, the sleeping spaces are arranged by a complex social calculus who generates the most body heat, who is most vulnerable to cold, who must be able to rise quickly if there's a problem. The beds themselves are masterpieces of thermal efficiency. First, the cold earth is covered with a thick layer of dried grass or sage, creating an insulating cushion and preventing the ground's deep cold from stealing body heat. Then, buffalo robes, the thick winter hides with the hair left on, are layered fur side up. More robes for covering, creating a sandwich of warmth with the sleeper in the middle. A properly constructed sleeping arrangement might have 6 to 8 buffalo robes, representing hundreds of hours of processing by the women of the camp. Every hide scraped, tanned, softened to maintain its insulating properties. At the moment, no one is sleeping yet. A woman tends the fire, adding 1 stick at a time, each piece of wood, no thicker than your thumb, and cut to exact length. There's no casual tossing of logs here. Every piece of fuel is precious, and the fire must be fed in tiny increments to last through the night without generating too much heat or smoke, and without requiring constant tending. She's calculated it perfectly. The wood she has prepared will maintain this temperature until dawn, if added at approximately 1-hour intervals. 2 children huddle close to their mother, both wrapped in rabbit fur blankets. Rabbit fur is especially prized for children because it's lighter than buffalo hide, allowing freedom of movement, but remarkably warm due to the hollow structure of the individual hairs, each one a tiny insulating tube. The blankets are made from dozens of rabbit pelts cut into strips and woven together, a technique so effective that the US military studied it in the 20th century for cold weather gear. An adolescent boy sits cross-legged, carefully working on arrows, using the firelight to straighten shafts by warming them and bending them true. This work never stops even in the depths of winter, because come spring, the quality of his arrows might determine whether his family eats or starves. His father watches occasionally, offering a quiet word of advice, passing down knowledge in the oldest way humans know. Everything in this space speaks of preparation, meeting necessity. The parfleches aren't randomly placed. They form an additional wind barrier at the door. The sleeping robes aren't just piled, they're arranged so the sleeper's combined body heat will pool in the center space, creating a warm core that benefits everyone. Even the positioning of the children near their mother isn't just about comfort. It's about thermal mass, using the larger adult body as a heat source for the smaller, more vulnerable ones. Near the fire sits a basket of stones, smooth river rocks, each about the size of a fist. These will be heated in the coals before sleep and wrapped in hide, then placed in the sleeping robes as primitive but remarkably effective heating pads. A hot stone can maintain usable warmth for hours, turning the fire's heat into portable, long-lasting comfort. It's a technology so simple that modern people might overlook it, but so effective that it kept countless people alive through countless frozen nights. The teepee shivers as a particularly strong gust hits it. The fire flickers, and everyone glances up, instinctively checking the smoke flaps, monitoring for problems. But the structure holds. The stakes, driven deep into the frozen earth, don't budge. The overlapping entrance flap doesn't gap. This shelter, this piece of portable architecture, has been perfected over thousands of years. It can withstand winds that would flatten modern tents. It can shed snow, breathe in ways that prevent condensation, disassemble and reassemble in an hour if the camp needs to move. But tonight, there will be no moving. Tonight, this circle of hide and smoke and carefully rationed warmth is the entire world. Outside, the temperature continues to fall. Inside, life continues its delicate, determined persistence. The woman tending the fire begins to hum softly, an old song, its words lost to time, but its melody carrying comfort. Continuity, the unbroken chain of mothers who sang to their children on cold nights, reaching back through the centuries. The children's eyes begin to droop. The man working on arrows sets them aside carefully, reverently, because good arrows are wealth, are survival, are the difference between success and failure. Soon, it will be time to sleep. Time to retreat into those cocoons of fur and shared warmth and trust that dawn will come, that the fire will last, that the cold will not find a way in. But not quite yet. There are still preparations to make rituals to observe the careful dance between human effort and the brutal indifference of a northern winter night. Outside the teepee, the wind has found its voice. It's a sound unlike anything you encounter in gentler climates, a sound that starts low, almost subsonic, vibrating in your chest before you consciously hear it. Then, it builds, rising through registers, like some vast frozen instrument whistling and howling and moaning all at once. The old-timers in this camp have names for different wind sounds, can read them like a language can tell from the pitch and rhythm whether a storm is building or passing, whether the cold will deepen or relent, whether morning will bring clear skies or whiteout conditions. This particular wind, they know, is going to be a bad one. Not the worst they've experienced. Not one of the legendary blizzards that can last for days and bury entire camps under drifts, but bad enough. The temperature has dropped another 5 degrees in the hour since sunset. It's now 43 below 0 Celsius, 46 below Fahrenheit, and the wind is gusting to 30 miles per hour, creating a wind chill that approaches the limits of human survival. At this temperature, the world behaves strangely. Water vapor in the air crystallizes, instantly creating ice fog that glitters in what little starlight penetrates the clouds. Carbon dioxide freezes, and there's so much moisture being sucked out of the air that you can see shimmering clouds of ice crystals, forming and reforming a ghostly dance in the darkness. If you threw a cup of boiling water into the air right now, it would turn to snow before it hit the ground, the droplets freezing so quickly they'd make a sound like wind chimes as they fell. But these are physics that the people of this camp don't describe with words like Celsius or Fahrenheit or wind chill. They describe it with simple, brutal clarity. This is a killing cold. This is the kind of night where a person who loses their way between teepees could freeze to death before finding shelter again. This is the kind of night where simply going outside to relieve yourself requires careful planning, quick execution, and no small amount of courage. Inside the teepee, the physics of survival are playing out in a delicate balance. The fire produces perhaps 2,000 BTUs of heat per hour, a fraction of what a modern space heater generates. 7 human bodies add their own heat, each one a biological furnace burning at approximately 300 watts, though that drops as activity decreases and sleep approaches. Together, the fire and the bodies generate enough warmth to maintain the interior space at just above freezing, somewhere between 34 and 38 degrees Fahrenheit. That might seem unbearably cold to someone accustomed to heated homes, but it's crucial to understand what it means in context. The temperature differential between inside and outside is nearly 80 degrees. 80 degrees of survival margin created by hide fire and human ingenuity. That differential is the difference between waking up in the morning and not waking up at all. The Taipei's design manages this heat in remarkably sophisticated ways. The conical shape means hot air naturally rises and concentrates in the upper portion, which is exactly where the smoke needs to go. The sleeping space lower down stays in the cooler but more breathable zone. The liner creates a chimney effect, drawing cold air down the outer wall across the floor, where it's warmed by the fire, then up the inner liner and out through the smoke hole. It's passive convection, powered by nothing but temperature differential and gravity, and it works flawlessly. Condensation is the enemy in cold weather shelter, and the teepee manages it brilliantly. In a sealed shelter, moisture from breath and bodies would condense on the cold walls, creating ice buildup that reduces insulation and eventually collapses the structure. But the teepee breathes. The hide itself is porous enough to allow moisture to escape while still blocking wind. The smoke hole, even partially closed, provides constant air exchange. The result is a space that stays remarkably dry despite housing 7 people and a fire. The stakes holding the teepee down are driven into ground that's frozen solid to a depth of 3 feet or more. Getting them in required careful site selection, finding spots where the earth was slightly less frozen, perhaps near the creek, where running water kept the ground marginally softer. But once in, those stakes are anchored better than any modern tent stake, held by the iron grip of permafrost that won't release them until spring. The wind hits the teepee in gusts, each one creating a visible ripple in the hide cover, running from bottom to top like a wave. But the structure doesn't shudder or strain. The conical shape deflects wind, naturally redirecting the force up and over, rather than allowing it to build up pressure. It's the same principle that allows mountains to withstand winds that would destroy flat structures, and it's been understood and applied by teepee builders for longer than written history. Meanwhile, outside, the snow that fell earlier is being redistributed by the wind. It doesn't fall from the sky now. It flows along the ground like water, finding the path of least resistance, piling up on the lee sides of obstacles, scouring bare the windward faces. The drifts are growing, some of them already 5 or 6 feet deep, sculpted by the wind into forms that look almost alive. Smooth curves and sharp edges, cornices that overhang and will eventually collapse under their own weight. This redistribution of snow is actually beneficial for the camp. The drifts that build up around the base of each teepee provide additional insulation, blocking the gap at ground level where cold air might otherwise seep in. By morning, each dwelling will be half buried, a mound of white with just the top portion and smoke hole visible. This is natural, expected, even welcome. The snow is free insulation, and come dawn clearing, the entrance will take just minutes of work. But it also means that the camp is slowly being erased from the landscape, becoming part of the frozen topography, visible only by the thin streams of smoke and the knowledge of where to look. To a stranger approaching across the prairie, there would be almost no sign of human habitation, no lights visible from distance, no sounds carrying over the wind's roar. This is camouflage by climate concealment, provided by the same force that makes survival so difficult. The temperature continues its fall. 45 below now. 48. The kind of cold where metal becomes brittle and shatters, where trees explode with sounds like gunshots as the sap freezes and expands, where the very air seems to thicken, each breath requiring slightly more effort, the oxygen feeling somehow less satisfying in the lungs. Inside the teepee, the occupants are feeling this change. Not dramatically, not in a way that requires immediate action, but in subtle ways. The interior temperature has dropped a degree or two. The fire needs another stick added carefully. The children are pulled slightly closer to their mother. A man adjusts his sleeping robe, ensuring there are no gaps where cold air might creep in. These are the constant, tiny adjustments that winter requires, the endless, small maintenance tasks that together spell the difference between success and failure. Check the fire. Check the smoke flaps. Check the door covering. Check on the children. Check your own extremities for numbness. Check, check, check. Never relax completely. Never assume everything is fine. Stay vigilant, stay aware, stay alive. Because outside, the night continues its patient, persistent assault. The cold doesn't rage or attack. It simply is constant and inexorable, ready to exploit any weakness, any gap, any moment of carelessness. It's been doing this for millions of years, long before humans arrived in this land, and it will continue long after they're gone. It doesn't hate. It doesn't even notice. It simply exists, and existence at 48 below zero is by its nature hostile to life. But inside 7 teepees in a winter camp on a frozen prairie, life persists. Maintained by knowledge, protected by preparation, sustained by the determination of people who understand that survival is not a single heroic act, but 10,000 small, careful ones performed correctly every single time, with no room for error and no possibility of rescue if things go wrong. The wind howls. The fire burns. The night deepens. And in this balance between human effort and natural force, the oldest story of all continues to unfold. Sleep in a winter camp is not the simple act of closing your eyes and drifting off that you might experience in your warm, safe bed tonight. It's a calculated process, a series of deliberate steps refined over generations, each one critical to ensuring that sleep leads to waking rather than to the long, cold sleep from which there is no return. The woman who tends the fire begins the evening ritual. She's done this thousands of times, and her movements have the unconscious grace of perfect practice. First, she checks the supply of wood stacked near the entrance. Enough for the knight cut to precise lengths arranged in order so she can find pieces in the dark by touch alone. Each stick is completely dry, bark stripped away, because wet or green wood would smoke terribly in this enclosed space and could suffocate the family before dawn. Next, she prepares the warming stones. These river rocks have been collected specifically for this purpose, chosen because they're smooth and won't crack under thermal stress. She places 6 of them directly into the coals, positioning them where they'll absorb maximum heat without blocking the fire's airflow. They'll need about an hour to reach optimal temperature, hot enough to maintain warmth for hours, but not so hot they'll burn through the hide wrappings. While the stones heat, the sleeping arrangements are prepared. This isn't just a matter of spreading out blankets, it's architecture thermal engineering, with materials most modern people would consider primitive, but which, when used correctly, outperform many synthetic alternatives even today. The base layer is crucial. Fresh dried grass has been brought in earlier in the day and spread in a thick mat across each sleeping area. This grass performs multiple functions. It insulates from the frozen ground below, preventing the Earth's deep cold from stealing body heat through conduction. It provides cushioning, which matters not just for comfort, but for health. Sleeping directly on frozen ground can cause pressure sores, frostbite of the skin in contact points, and a dozen other ailments. And crucially, it breathes, allowing moisture from the sleeper to escape downward, rather than accumulating and eventually freezing. On top of the grass go the buffalo robes, and this is where the true sophistication shows. The bottom robe is placed hair side down, creating a smooth surface against the grass. This is typically an older hide, perhaps worn thin in places, valuable more for its coverage than its insulation. Its job is to provide a clean, dry base layer. Then come the sleeping robes proper, and these are treasures. A prime winter buffalo hide taken in late fall when the coat is thickest can weigh 40 pounds. The hair is dense, sometimes 3 inches long, and beneath the hair is the hide itself, thick and supple from the tanning process, retaining natural oils that repel moisture while maintaining flexibility even in extreme cold. 2 robes are typically used per sleeper, one to lie upon and one for covering. But they're not used like blankets. The sleeper doesn't lie on top of one and pull the other over like a modern bedroll. Instead, the robes are overlapped, creating a pocket, an envelope of warmth with the sleeper enclosed in the middle. The weight of the hides, 30 or 40 pounds pressing down, isn't a burden, it's an asset. That weight seals out drafts, presses the insulating hair against the body, creates a microclimate that will maintain survival temperature through the night. For the children, there are the rabbit fur blankets I mentioned earlier. These are miracles of patient craftsmanship. A single blanket might contain the pelts of 50 rabbits, each one carefully prepared, cut into continuous strips and woven on a simple frame loom with plant fiber warps. The result is a fabric that's extraordinarily light, breathable, and warm. Modern outdoor companies have tried to recreate this using rabbit fur, and they've found that gram for gram, it outperforms almost anything else, including goose down, in terms of warmth to weight ratio. The elder prepares his sleeping space with the practiced efficiency of someone who's performed this ritual perhaps 20,000 times in his life. He adds an additional element, a backrest made from willow wands, bent and lashed together, creating a frame that will support him at a slight angle rather than lying completely flat. This isn't just comfort. At his age, lying flat for hours in the cold can lead to congestion, difficulty breathing, even pneumonia. The slight elevation helps his lungs clear, helps him rest more effectively, despite the challenging conditions. The warming stones are ready now, glowing dull red in the coals. Using 2 green sticks as tongs, the woman lifts each one out and immediately wraps it in several layers of hide scraps, creating insulated packets about the size and shape of a small loaf of bread. These are distributed to the sleeping spaces, 1 or 2 per person, depending on age and need. The children get theirs first, placed at their feet, where they'll warm the entire sleeping envelope. The elder gets 1 at his feet, and 1 that he'll hold against his lower back, where old injuries ache in the cold. Touch one of these wrapped stones, and you'd find it pleasantly warm but not burning. Hold it for hours, and it will gradually cool, but so slowly that it will still be noticeably warm at dawn. The heat it provides isn't just physical comfort. It's psychological safety, a tangible assurance that the cold can be fought, that human ingenuity can create warmth, even when everything outside speaks of death and freezing. Now comes the layering of human warmth. And this is where community becomes survival technology. The family doesn't sleep scattered around the tipi. They sleep in deliberate proximity, arranged to maximize heat sharing while maintaining the social structures that govern plain society. The mother sleeps with the 2 youngest children on either side of her, their small bodies pressed close, her larger mass serving as a thermal anchor. The adolescent boy sleeps near his father, both positioned where they can rise quickly if there's a problem, the door to check an animal, to investigate danger to address. The elder is positioned with his back toward the northwest, the direction from which the worst cold flows. This isn't because he's expendable, but because he generates less body heat due to age and needs the protection of the other's warmth radiating toward him. The circle of sleepers is incomplete, shaped more like a horseshoe with the open end toward the fire, allowing heat from the coals to flow into the sleeping area while preventing anyone from rolling into the fire during sleep. As each person settles into their sleeping robes, there's a brief period of discomfort. The robes start out cold, perhaps only a few degrees warmer than the ambient air. It takes time for body heat to warm the space inside, and that initial contact with cold hide is unpleasant. But everyone knows this phase will pass. Within 10 or 15 minutes, the trapped air inside the robes will warm to near body temperature, and the real insulation will begin. Clothing is adjusted, but not removed. The idea of sleeping naked, or even in light clothing, would be absurd lethal. Instead, people sleep fully dressed in their warmest garments, typically several layers. Against the skin, a soft leather shirt, the hide scraped so thin it's almost like fabric, providing a smooth base layer. Over that, perhaps a heavier hide shirt, and then the winter robe worn during the day, all of this kept on through the night. Feet remain wrapped in their fur-lined moccasins, stuffed with dried grass for additional insulation. The breathing changes as people settle. It becomes deliberate, controlled. Rapid breathing loses heat and moisture. Slow breathing conserves both. This is understood intuitively, taught by example learned through the simple experience of what works and what doesn't, when the margin for error is measured in degrees. The last task before true sleep falls to the fire tender tonight, the woman of the family. She adds one more small stick to the coals, ensuring there's enough fuel to maintain heat for the first sleep cycle. Then she checks the smoke flaps one final time, reading the firelight's behavior to ensure the draft is correct. She looks at each family member, confirming that everyone is properly settled, that all the warming stones are positioned safely, that no one has a gap in their covering that might admit cold air. Satisfied, she settles into her own robes, the children pressed close on either side. Her eyes stay open a moment longer, watching the fire's glow-paint shadows on the tapi's interior, creating a small universe of warm light surrounded by infinite cold darkness. She's not worried. This is familiar. This is what her mother taught her, what her grandmother knew, what has sustained her people through winters beyond counting. Outside, the wind still howls. The temperature still falls. But inside, 7 teepees sleep. Begins to claim its due, pulling people down into rest, trusting that the preparations have been sufficient, that the knowledge has been applied correctly, that dawn will come and find them alive. This is history to fall asleep to. Yes, but it's also history that teaches. Our ancestors understood something we've largely forgotten, that safety doesn't come from controlling nature, but from understanding it, working with it, accepting its terms, while finding the narrow spaces where human life can persist. The fire burns lower. The breathing slows, deepens, becomes the regular rhythm of sleep. The night settles in for its long watch, and in the darkness and cold, wrapped in fur and warmed by stone, and sustained by love and knowledge, and the fierce determination to survive life, continues its quiet, stubborn persistence. But sleep doesn't come immediately for everyone. There are still tasks, small but essential, that must be completed before the camp can truly settle into the vulnerable hours of deep rest. The father rises from his partially arranged sleeping space, wrapping a heavy buffalo robe around his shoulders. He's going outside, and the preparation for even this simple act reveals the seriousness of the cold. He wraps his face, leaving only a small opening for his eyes. He pulls his hood tight. He ensures his moccasins are secure. Then he lifts the entrance flap, and a knife of cold air slices into the teepee's warmth, visible as a shimmer of condensation in the firelight. He's gone perhaps 3 minutes. When he returns, ice has formed on the fur around his face, opening his breath frozen instantly into white crystal. He's shaking not dramatically, but with the deep, involuntary tremors of someone who's just experienced a temperature shift of nearly 90 degrees in a matter of seconds. He doesn't speak immediately. Speech requires breath, and his breath is still coming in sharp, controlled gasps as his body adjusts. What was he doing out there? Checking on the horses. Not riding horses. Those have been picketed in a relatively sheltered spot in the creek bottom, covered with blankets made from old teepee, covers their feed carefully rationed to maintain condition without wasting precious hay. No, he was checking the camp's perimeter, ensuring that the snow hadn't drifted against the teepee in ways that might block the smoke hole or bury the entrance. He was checking that the meat cache hadn't been disturbed by wolves or other predators. He was reading the weather with senses honed by a lifetime of winters, determining whether this night's cold had reached its depth or would continue to fall. His report, when he can speak, is brief. The wind is shifting slightly east. The cloud cover is breaking up. Both of these things mean the temperature will drop further before dawn, potentially reaching 50 below or colder. Because clear skies mean no insulating clouds, no barrier between the Earth and the infinite cold of space. But it also means the wind will likely decrease, and high wind is often more dangerous than extreme cold alone. So this is mixed news, neither cause for alarm nor complete reassurance. The adolescent boy has his own evening task. He's checking the water supply such as it is. In winter, on the plains, liquid water is a precious commodity. The creek is frozen solid, the ice thick enough that cutting through it requires an axe and considerable effort. The family's water supply consists of a parfleche container filled with snow that sits near the fire, melting slowly throughout the day and night. But snow is a treacherous source of hydration. It takes approximately 10 pounds of snow to yield 1 pound of water, meaning the container must be refilled constantly. And eating snow directly is dangerous, lowering core body temperature and causing more dehydration than it relieves. The snow must be melted and the water consumed carefully warmed at least to near freezing before drinking. The boy checks the water level, finds it adequate for the night, but adds more snow to the container anyway. Better to have too much than too little. Dehydration is a silent killer in winter, often unnoticed until it's severe, because the cold suppresses thirst sensation and the dry air pulls moisture from every breath. By some estimates, a person in these conditions needs almost as much water as they would in a desert. But the body's signals are all wrong, creating a dangerous disconnect between need and awareness. The mother has her own pre-sleep routine, and it's perhaps the most important of all. She's checking on the pemmican supply, performing the calculation that every winter keeper must make nightly how much food remains versus how many days until spring might reasonably be expected. Pemmican, that miracle of food preservation, is the bedrock of winter survival. For those unfamiliar, pemmican is far more than just dried meat. It's precisely formulated nutrition, and its creation requires knowledge, skill, and considerable labor. Lean meat, typically buffalo or deer, is cut into thin strips and dried until it's completely desiccated, hard as wood, impossible to spoil. This dried meat is then pounded into a coarse powder. To this powder is added rendered fat, pure and carefully strained, mixed in approximately equal proportions by weight. Finally, dried berries, usually choke cherries or service berries, are added for flavor and their vitamin content. This mixture is packed tightly into parfleches or sewn into rawhide bags, creating blocks of concentrated nutrition that will keep literally for decades if stored properly. A pound of pemmican contains approximately 3,000 calories, with an almost perfect balance of protein and fat for sustaining human life in cold conditions. It doesn't freeze solid like pure meat would. It doesn't require cooking, though it can be warmed or added to soups. It is quite simply one of humanity's greatest achievements in food technology, developed by people who had no understanding of calories or nutrition science, but understood perfectly well what the body needed to survive. The mother's count tonight is reassuring. They have perhaps 80 pounds of pemmican, remaining enough for the family to survive on pemmican alone for roughly 3 weeks, if necessary longer, if they continue to supplement with other foods. The fall hunt was good. The women worked efficiently. The storage locations were well chosen, high enough that melting snow won't seep in, cold enough that even scavenging animals will struggle to access them. but she knows better than to be complacent. Winters can stretch long. What seems like adequate supply in December can look desperately meager by March, when the snow is still deep. But the pemmican stores are running low, and spring seems like a cruel joke that will never actually arrive. She makes a mental note to be slightly more conservative with portions over the next few days. Not enough that anyone goes hungry, but enough that the supplies will last a week longer if needed. While she's checking food, she also examines the other parfleches, ensuring everything is dry, that no moisture has found its way into the stored materials. Moisture in winter storage is insidious. It seems harmless, just a bit of dampness, but it can lead to mold, to rot, to the ruin of irreplaceable materials. Leather that's been carefully tanned to remain supple in the cold can become brittle if it gets wet, and then freezes. Dried medicinal herbs can lose their potency. Spare moccasins can stiffen and become unwearable. Everything is dry. Everything is in order. She allows herself a small moment of satisfaction at her own competence, at the good management that will see her family through another winter night. The elder, meanwhile, has been performing his own ritual, though his takes place entirely in stillness. He's been sitting quietly, his eyes closed, but not sleeping, engaged in something that might be called prayer or meditation, or simply the mental preparation that age and experience have taught him is necessary. He's reviewing the day, considering the weather signs, thinking through contingencies. If the temperature truly drops to 50 below, should they reduce the fire even further to conserve wood, or risk running short later to ensure greater warmth now? If someone becomes ill, what medicines are available? If the wind shifts and drives smoke back down into the teepee, what adjustments to the flaps will correct it? These aren't anxious thoughts. They're professional considerations. The mental checklist of someone whose role in the family is to be the repository of knowledge, the voice of experience when decisions must be made. He's survived 60 winters. He's seen blizzards that lasted a week, cold snaps that killed half the horses, winters that ended late, and springs that came early. He's watched children die from cold and starvation, and he's watched families thrive through harsh seasons because someone made the right decisions at the right times. He carries all of that knowledge, and reviewing it before sleep is as much a part of his night routine as checking the fire is for the woman. The teepee is quieting now. The children are already asleep, their breathing soft and regular. The father has settled into his robes. The boy has checked the water one final time and is burrowing into his own sleeping space. The mother has banked the fire, arranging the coals in a configuration that will allow them to burn slowly, steadily releasing heat at the optimal rate for the night ahead. The elder opens his eyes, looks around at his family, at the space that shelters them, at the small circle of firelight that is their entire world in this moment. He feels the weight of responsibility, yes, but also something deeper. Pride, perhaps. Gratitude. The knowledge that this family, this unit of shared survival, is doing everything correctly. The knowledge that the young ones are learning that when his winters finally end, they'll carry forward the skills and wisdom that have sustained their people through the harshest conditions nature can create. He settles into his own robes, the warming stones at his feet and back already beginning to radiate their slow, patient heat. His breathing slows, his eyes close. The night routine is complete. In 7 teepees across a darkening prairie, similar rituals have played out. Food checked, water prepared, children settled, fires banked. knowledge reviewed. Everything that can be done has been done. Everything that can be controlled has been controlled. The rest is in the hands of the preparation, the quality of the shelter, the thickness of the hides, the wisdom of the ancestors who developed these techniques over uncounted generations. The rest is trust not in providence or fate, but in the simple fact that this has worked before countless times, and if done correctly, will work again tonight. Outside, the stars are beginning to emerge through breaking clouds, hard and bright and utterly indifferent. The temperature continues its fall. 50 below is no longer a prediction, but a reality, and it's still 3 hours until the coldest point of the night. But inside, in the warmth and darkness, and the gentle sound of breathing life has already begun its retreat into sleep's sanctuary, trusting that dawn will find them still alive, still together, still maintaining their stubborn, beautiful resistance to the cold's final claim. The darkness in a winter teepee is different from any darkness you're likely to experience in the modern world. It's not the darkness of a bedroom where streetlights leak around curtains, or the darkness punctuated by the LED displays of electronics, or even the darkness of a remote cabin where moonlight through windows provides some ambient light. This darkness is complete primal, the darkness that humans evolved in and feared and learned to endure. When the fire burns down to just coals barely glowing, the interior of the teepee becomes so dark that you can't see your hand in front of your face. The hide walls admit no light from outside. The smoke hole shows perhaps a small patch of stars, but that's overhead useless for navigating the interior space. This is the darkness of caves, of underground chambers, of places where light is utterly absent, and the eyes, strain as they might, can perceive nothing. For modern people, this darkness would likely trigger anxiety, even panic. We are not accustomed to such complete sensory deprivation. We expect to be able to see, to orient ourselves visually, to confirm our safety and the safety of our loved ones with a glance. Remove that ability, and the mind can spiral into fear. But for the people of this camp, this darkness is familiar. Not comfortable, perhaps, but known, expected, manageable. They've developed psychological strategies for enduring it, and these strategies are as much a part of winter survival skill as knowing how to build a fire or cure a hide. The first strategy is sound. In darkness, hearing becomes the primary sense, and the soundscape of a winter teepee provides constant reassurance. There's the soft, steady breathing of family members, each person's rhythm slightly different, creating a gentle chorus that speaks of life, continuing, of rest being achieved. There's the faint crackling of the fire's coals, irregular and quiet, but persistent. There's the wind outside, muffled by the hide, but still audible, a reminder of what's being kept at bay by these thin walls. These sounds are monitored constantly, even in sleep. Any change, any disruption will wake at least one person. If a child's breathing becomes labored, their mother wakes. If the wind sound changes, suggesting a shift in direction that might affect the smoke flaps, the father wakes. If the fire's sound fades too much, suggesting the coals are dying prematurely, someone wakes to tend it. This is light sleep by modern standards, but it's the sleep that evolution designed. The sleep that keeps watch, even while resting. The sleep that must be achieved when there's no one else to keep watch, no safety beyond what you provide yourself. The second psychological strategy is routine. The darkness and cold and potential danger don't change, but the response to them becomes so practiced, so automatic, that they lose much of their psychological weight. The nightly tasks I described aren't just practical, they're ritual, and ritual provides comfort even when conditions remain harsh. There's a profound psychological benefit in knowing exactly what to do in having performed these actions so many times that they require no thought, no decision-making. Decision fatigue is real, and it's especially draining in survival situations. But if the routine is established, if every evening follows the same pattern, the mind can rest from that burden. The body simply performs the familiar actions, and the mind can conserve its energy for the moments when genuine decisions are required. The third strategy, perhaps most important, is acceptance. These people don't fight the darkness or resent it. They don't wish for electric lights or curse the long winter nights. They accept them as part of the natural cycle, as necessary as breathing, as inevitable as the seasons themselves. This acceptance isn't passive resignation. It's active acknowledgement of reality, and from that acknowledgement comes the ability to work within reality's constraints, rather than exhausting yourself fighting them. There's a story told among some plains tribes about a young man who couldn't sleep through winter nights, who tossed and turned and complained about the darkness and cold. An elder finally took him aside and explained, "The winter night doesn't care about your complaints. It will be dark whether you accept it or not. It will be cold whether you rage against it or not. You can spend your energy fighting what cannot be changed, or you can spend it preparing for what can be managed. Choose." The young man in the story learns to sleep, not because the nights become easier, but because he stops making them harder with his resistance. And that's a lesson that extends beyond winter survival to life itself, a wisdom that our ancestors understood, and that we've perhaps lost in our climate-controlled, artificially lit modern existence. But even with these psychological strategies, the darkness and cold still exact their toll. Sleep in these conditions is not the deep restorative sleep of perfect safety. It's survival sleep that must balance rest with vigilance, sleep that must occur despite discomfort and despite the body's awareness that conditions are far from optimal. The cold is a constant presence, even inside the sleeping robes. It's there at the edge of the nose, the one part of the face left exposed for breathing. It's there in the air being breathed cold enough that you can feel it in the throat, cold enough that some people develop chronic winter coughs from months of breathing air that's barely above freezing. It's there in any gap in the robes, any place where the seal isn't perfect, seeping in like liquid, searching for warm skin to leach heat from. The mind develops strategies for managing this constant low-grade discomfort. Some people visualize warmth, imagining summer days, the feel of sun on skin, the memory of heat. Others use counting not to fall asleep exactly, but to occupy the mind, preventing it from fixating on discomfort. Some use the rhythm of breathing, making it a meditative focus. Each inhale and exhale a small task, completed a moment of survival achieved. There's also the awareness of time, the knowledge that this night, like all nights, will end. Dawn will come. The darkness will retreat. The cold will lessen, if only slightly. This temporal awareness provides hope, and hope is its own survival skill, perhaps the most important one. Without hope, the mind gives up. With hope, even minimal, the mind continues to engage, continues to push the body towards survival, continues to believe that enduring this night will lead to another day, The children in the teepee experience this darkness differently. For them, it's less fraught with awareness of danger. They sleep more deeply, their young bodies still able to surrender completely to rest in ways that adults cannot. But they too are learning absorbing lessons that they don't yet consciously understand. They're learning that darkness is survivable, that fear can be managed, that safety comes from family and preparation rather than from the absence of danger. Years from now, these children will be the adults managing their own families through winter nights, and the psychological resilience they're developing now will serve them then. They'll remember, perhaps not consciously, but in the deep muscle memory of the mind, that they survived this, that their parents survived this, that generations of ancestors survived this, and that memory will provide strength when they need it. The darkness presses in. The cold seeps through imperceptible gaps. The night wears on hour after hour, the rotation of stars overhead, marking time in a way that no one inside can see, but everyone can feel. It's perhaps midnight now, perhaps 1 in the morning. The coldest part of the night is still ahead. In the mother's sleeping robe, one of the children stirs, making a small sound of distress. Perhaps a bad dream, perhaps just a moment of discomfort from the cold. The mother responds instantly, still mostly asleep herself, pulling the child closer, adjusting the robes to eliminate a gap, murmuring soft reassurance. The child settles. The mother's breathing returns to the rhythm of sleep. This is the dance of winter nights, the constant small adjustments, the vigilance that never completely sleeps, the determination to protect and preserve that trumps personal comfort or rest. This is parenthood in its most elemental form, stripped of everything except the core imperative: keep the children alive. Keep them warm. Keep them safe, whatever it costs, however long it takes. The fire's coals pulse softly. Barely visible, their glow painting nothing but the faintest suggestion of light on the nearest hide walls. The wind outside has decreased slightly, but the cold has deepened in compensation, nature's way of reminding humans that they never really control the terms of survival, only negotiate them. And in the darkness, 7 hearts beat, 7 sets of lungs. Breathe 7 human lives persist in the face of conditions that would kill them in hours if the shelter failed, if the knowledge was absent, if the preparations had been inadequate. This is the human story in its oldest, truest form, fragile biological life insisting on continuing, despite everything nature can bring to bear against it. The darkness doesn't care. The cold doesn't care. But the people inside the teepee care, and that caring, that fierce determination to see morning, to survive another night, to protect the vulnerable and preserve the family. That caring is ultimately stronger than the indifferent forces arrayed against it. It has to be, because the alternative is unthinkable, and so it must be thought around, worked around, endured around, until dawn finally brings its reprieve. The night wears on. Sleep deepens and lightens and deepens again. Dreams come, strange dreams that winter and cold seem to make more vivid, dreams of summer, of warmth, of plenty. Dreams that are perhaps the mind's way of compensating for the body's current reality. And outside, unseen and unheard in the darkness, the temperature continues its fall toward the deepest cold of the night, toward the point where survival becomes most difficult, toward the test that must be passed before dawn's relief can arrive. But inside 7 typos the preparations hold. The knowledge proves sufficient. The robes provide warmth. The fires maintain their coals. And life, stubborn and determined and more resilient than the cold can comprehend, continues its quiet, unremarkable, utterly magnificent persistence. To understand how these winter survival techniques developed, we need to step back, not just years, but millennia into the deep time of human occupation of the northern plains. The first people to arrive in what would become the Great Plains region came perhaps 13,000 years ago, emerging from the Ice Age into a world vastly different from the one we know. The great glaciers were retreating, but their influence remained. The climate was colder, wetter, the landscape populated by megafauna giant animals that modern eyes would struggle to recognize. These earliest peoples were not living in teepees. The teepee, for all its ancient feel, is relatively recent, perhaps only 2,000 years old in its current form. Before that winter, shelters were more varied, more experimental each generation, trying different approaches, learning through the brutal education of trial and error what worked and what failed. Some built pit houses, digging several feet into the earth and roofing over the excavation with wood and hide. These were excellent for winter, the earth itself providing insulation, but they were difficult to abandon quickly if the camp needed to move. Others used the natural shelters available in the landscape rock overhangs and caves where they existed, though these were rare on the open plains. The development of the teepee represented a kind of perfect synthesis, a shelter that was portable enough for a nomadic lifestyle, yet effective enough for winter survival. But it didn't emerge fully formed. It evolved each generation, making small refinements each winter, teaching new lessons about angles and dimensions and materials. What's remarkable is how these lessons were preserved and transmitted. These cultures had no written language, no books or manuals detailing the precise mathematics of teepee construction. Instead, knowledge was embedded in practice, taught by doing, learned by watching. A girl would help her mother sew teepee covers from the age she could hold a bone needle, and through thousands of hours of that work, she'd internalize the knowledge of exactly how many buffalo hides were needed, how they should be cut and fitted, where the seams should overlap for weather resistance. A boy would watch his father position the teepee poles, noting the exact angle of lean the spacing of the legs, the positioning relative to prevailing winds. He'd learn not through instruction, but through observation and imitation, his body learning what his mind couldn't yet articulate. By the time he was a man responsible for his own family's shelter, he'd have the knowledge so deeply ingrained it would feel like instinct, though it was actually accumulated cultural wisdom reaching back through generations. This method of knowledge transmission had strengths and weaknesses. Its great strength was reliability. A technique taught by demonstration and practice was unlikely to be misunderstood or misapplied. Its great weakness was fragility. If a generation was decimated by disease or war or disaster before the knowledge could be fully transmitted, it could be lost forever. And indeed, much was lost. When European contact brought waves of epidemic disease in the 16th and 17th centuries, entire communities were wiped out, taking their knowledge with them. Some winter survival techniques, some medicinal preparations, some ritual practices vanished completely, surviving now only as fragmentary mentions in early explorers' journals or in the oral traditions of descendant communities trying to piece together what was lost. But much survived, and what survived is testament to how deeply embedded this knowledge was how thoroughly it permeated the culture. The teepee didn't just survive. It thrived, becoming more refined, more efficient, spreading across the plains as different tribes adopted and adapted the basic design to their specific needs. The Sioux developed a taller, narrower teepee that handled high winds better. The Blackfeet preferred a wider base and steeper sides for maximizing interior space. The Cheyenne innovated with the smoke flap design, creating a system of exterior poles that allowed adjustment from its side without going out into the storm. Each variation was a response to specific environmental challenges, a solution worked out through experience and encoded in the cultural practice of each tribe. Material science, though they wouldn't have called it that, was crucial. The perfect teepee cover required hides from buffalo, killed in late fall when the hair was thickest, but before the extreme cold of deep winter made the hide too difficult to work. The hides had to be tanned in a specific way, using a mixture of buffalo brain and liver that resulted in leather that remained supple in cold while still being weather-resistant. The women who did this work were in a very real sense chemical engineers, though they understood their craft not in terms of protein chains and pH levels, but in terms of what worked and what didn't, knowledge gained from thousands of hours of practice. A properly tanned hide was valuable beyond measure. An improperly tanned one might crack in the cold, admitting wind and moisture, potentially leading to the death of everyone sheltered beneath it. Thread for sewing the hides together came from buffalo sinew, the long tendons from along the spine and legs. This sinew was dried, then pounded until it separated into fibers that could be twisted into thread stronger than any plant fiber. A teepee might require several miles of sinew thread, representing the processing of sinew from dozens of buffalo. When you understand the labor involved, the teepee stops being a simple tent and reveals itself as a monument to patient, skilled work. The poles, too, required specific knowledge. They needed to be straight-grained pine or lodgepole pine, cut at the right time of year, allowed to season properly. Too green, and they'd warp. Too dry, and they'd be brittle. The right poles would last for years, becoming lighter as they aged, but not weaker, carrying the family's shelter across countless moves. Some families had teepee poles that had been in use for generations, each one known individually, each one positioned in the same spot in the framework every time the teepee was erected. There are accounts of women who could identify their own family's poles, even in a pile of hundreds, recognizing the unique grain or the specific wear pattern from years of use. This relationship with materials, this intimate knowledge of every component of the survival system, is something modern people have largely lost. We use materials we don't understand, created by processes. We can't replicate designed by engineers we'll never meet. It makes our lives easier in many ways, but it also severs us from the deep connection our ancestors had with the physical world that sustained them. They knew their buffalo robes not as generic items, but as specific hides from specific animals, could remember the hunt that brought that particular buffalo down, could see in the pattern of the hair the quality of the grass the animal had eaten, and therefore the health it had been in. They knew their stone tools as specific rocks, found in specific places, chosen for grain and hardness, shaped with techniques learned from childhood. This knowledge created a kind of security, a confidence that came from understanding. When you know your shelter is made from materials you've personally selected, processed and assembled, when you've done it correctly 100 times before, there's a psychological resilience that forms. You're not depending on luck or hoping the equipment will work. You know it will work because you made it work, because it's worked before, because it must work, because there's no alternative. That said, we shouldn't romanticize too much. This life was hard in ways modern people can barely conceive. Child mortality was high, especially in winter. A bad fall hunt could doom a family to starvation. A harsh spring coming late could kill even those who'd survived the winter. Disease, injury, conflict with other tribes, these were constant threats. But within those constraints, within that harsh reality, there was also richness. Communities were tight-knit because survival demanded it. Children knew their place in an extended family network that could span dozens of people. Skills were valued because they were literally life-saving. And there was beauty even in the hardship. The beauty of a well-made object, a perfectly balanced arrow, a hide tanned to perfection. The beauty of a winter night survived, of a dawn arrived at, of spring finally returned. Modern Indigenous communities still carry some of this knowledge, still practice some of these skills, though often in modified form. There are tipi camps at powwows where the old designs are still used, where the smoke flap adjustment and the fire tending are still practiced. There are grandmothers who still know how to tan a hide using the old methods, though buffalo are scarce now, and often the knowledge is applied to deer or elk instead. But much is being lost, eroded by each generation that doesn't learn each elder who dies without passing on all they knew. Efforts are being made to preserve what remains, to document the techniques and teach them to younger generations. But it's a race against time and cultural change. When you sleep tonight in your warm bed, in your climate-controlled room, take a moment to consider what was lost when we gave up this intimate relationship with the materials and methods of our survival. We gained comfort and security, yes, but we also lost something valuable: the knowledge of how to persist with minimal resources, the confidence that comes from self-sufficiency, the connection to thousands of years of human experience. The people of this winter camp would look at our modern lives with a mixture of amazement and pity. Amazement at the warmth and abundance and ease. Pity that we've become so dependent on systems we don't understand and can't repair if they fail. They would wonder what we would do if the power grid failed, if the supply chains broke, if we were suddenly cast back into the kind of self-reliance that was their everyday reality. It's a humbling thought. And perhaps in some small way, that's why these stories matter, why this history to fall asleep, to serves more than just entertainment. It reminds us of who we were, what we're capable of, what our ancestors endured so that we could be here. It connects us across the gulf of time and technology to the fundamental human experience of struggling to survive, to protect our loved ones, to see another dawn. The teepee still stands in the modern imagination as a symbol of Indigenous American life. But it's more than a symbol. It's a textbook of environmental adaptation, a museum of material science, and a testament to human ingenuity. Everything about it, from the angle of the poles, to the composition of the hide covering, to the positioning of the smoke flaps, represents knowledge earned through experience and transmitted across generations. And on a night like this, in the deepest cold of winter, it's the difference between life and death. Simple as that. Profound as that. There's an aspect of winter survival that the historical record often overlooks. Perhaps because it doesn't leave physical artifacts. Perhaps because early European observers didn't understand what they were seeing. Perhaps because the people who practiced it saw no need to explain something so fundamental to outsiders. I'm talking about the network of reciprocal obligations that functioned as a kind of social insurance system, a safety net woven from tradition and sustained by the understanding that survival was never a purely individual achievement. In modern Western thinking, we tend to valorize self-sufficiency, the rugged individual who needs no help from others. But plain societies understood something that we've forgotten in marginal environments. Individualism is a luxury no one can afford. Your survival depends not just on your own skills and resources, but on your position within a web of mutual support, a network that could extend to distant relatives, to neighboring bands, even to nominal enemies when circumstances required it. Consider a family whose fall hunt went poorly, who entered winter with inadequate meat stores. In a purely individualistic society, they might be left to starve. But in the societies we're discussing, they had options. They could call on kin obligations, distant relatives, who would share their stores not out of pure altruism, but because social rules demanded it, and because they understood that fortune was fickle, that next winter their positions might be reversed. They could participate in a complex gift economy where what appeared to be generous gifts were actually investments creating obligations of reciprocation that might be called upon in future times of need. A gift of 3 buffalo robes this winter created a debt that might be repaid with access to good camping grounds next summer, or support in a political dispute, or the loan of horses for a hunt. These weren't written contracts. They were social bonds maintained through memory and reputation. Everyone in a band knew who owed what to whom, who had been generous in times of plenty, and who had been stingy, who honored their obligations and who tried to evade them. Reputation was currency perhaps more valuable than any physical wealth, because reputation could be converted into aid when aid meant the difference between survival and death. There were also practices that modern people might find shocking, but that made perfect sense in the context of marginal subsistence. In the worst winters, when food ran desperately low, the elderly would sometimes choose to walk out into the cold, removing themselves as consumers so that younger members of the family would have a better chance of surviving until spring. This wasn't murder. It wasn't even really suicide in the modern sense. It was a kind of ultimate gift, the final act of self-sacrifice by someone who had lived a full life and was willing to die so that others might live. The stories that survive about such acts speak of them with reverence, portraying the elders who made this choice as heroes, as the highest examples of the value their culture placed on the collective good over individual survival. We don't know how common this practice actually was. The historical record is spotty, often filtered through the biases of outsiders who found the idea horrifying and might have exaggerated its prevalence. But we know it happened, and we know it was understood within the culture as an acceptable, even admirable response to dire circumstances. There were other practices too equally hard for modern sensibilities to process. In some circumstances, when a family couldn't feed all their children through the winter, infants might be given to other families who had better resources. Essentially, an informal adoption driven by necessity. Or more rarely, an infant might not be allowed to survive at all, a heartbreaking calculation made by parents who knew they couldn't sustain another mouth and chose to preserve the children they already had. These weren't decisions made lightly or without grief, but they were made because the alternative was potentially everyone starving. Modern people might judge these practices as barbaric, but they were responses to situations that we in our abundance can barely imagine. What would you do if the choice was between one child dying and all your children dying? It's easy to judge from the safety of a well-stocked grocery store. It's much harder when you're actually facing that decision. But winter wasn't all grim calculation and survival at any cost. There was also joy community, the fierce warmth of human connection that became even more precious in the cold and darkness. The long winter nights were times for stories for the old ones, to teach the young ones for the accumulated wisdom of the culture to be transmitted. A grandfather might spend an evening describing the great buffalo hunt of his youth, and in that story would be embedded lessons about reading weather, about herd behavior, about cooperation and courage. A grandmother might tell stories of plant medicines, narratively embedding the knowledge of which roots to dig in spring, which leaves to gather in summer, which barks to peel in fall. The stories weren't just entertainment. They were educational technology information encoded in narrative, because narrative is how human memory works best. Winter was also a time for crafts, for the careful work that couldn't be rushed. A man might spend weeks crafting a bow, selecting the wood, shaping it, testing its flex, stringing it with sinew, adjusting until it was perfect. A woman might create a beautifully beaded dress, each tiny bead sewn in place during long dark hours, the pattern carrying symbolic meaning about her family's history or her own spiritual experiences. These crafts served practical purposes, yes, but they were also art and insistence that even in the harshest conditions, beauty mattered, that the human spirit required more than just survival. It required meaning expression, the creation of objects that would outlast their makers and carry forward something essential about who they were. Music was part of winter too. Drums and flutes, and the human voice creating sound to fill the darkness, to mark time, to call the community together. Songs that had been sung for so many generations that no one remembered who first created them. Songs that were as much a part of the cultural inheritance as the knowledge of how to tan a hide or read the weather. And of course, there was courtship, because even in winter, especially in winter, with everyone in close quarters, young people's thoughts turned to romance. Flirtation had to be conducted carefully under the watchful eyes of parents and the enforced proximity of the winter camp. But it happened. Marriages were often arranged, yes, but that didn't mean affection didn't develop, that couples didn't learn to love each other, or at least to build the kind of partnership that sustained families through difficult times. Some of the sweetest historical accounts from this period come from outsiders describing the obvious affection between couples. The gentle way a husband might adjust his wife's robe, the pride in a woman's voice when speaking of her husband's hunting prowess. These were people in the end not so different from us, despite the vast gulf of time and technology. They loved, they worried, they hoped, they grieved. The spiritual life of winter also had its own texture. Many plains tribes saw winter as a time of dormancy, when the earth slept and the spirit world was closer, more accessible. It was a time for vision quests for young men seeking guidance from the spirits, though those conducted in winter were considered especially arduous and therefore especially powerful. There were ceremonies too, rites performed to ensure that spring would return, that the buffalo would come back, that the earth would wake from its frozen sleep. These weren't superstitions in the sense of being separate from practical life. They were part of the same holistic worldview that saw the teepee design and the food preservation techniques and the spiritual practices as all interconnected, all part of the same effort to maintain harmony with the forces that controlled survival. A skeptic might dismiss these spiritual practices as meaningless, but they served profound psychological purposes. They gave people a sense of agency in a situation where much was beyond their control. They provided hope, ritual structure, shared purpose. They helped communities cohere, working together toward common goals. Whether the spirits actually existed or not is almost beside the point. The practices worked because the people believed they worked, and that belief created real effects in terms of morale, cooperation, and cultural continuity. As the night deepens and we move toward the coldest hours before dawn, it's worth reflecting on how different these people's relationship with winter was from ours. We see winter as an inconvenience at best, a hardship at worst, something to be conquered with technology or escaped by traveling to warmer climates. But for them, winter was a fundamental part of existence, as natural as breathing, as inevitable as death, as worthy of respect as any living thing. They didn't fight winter. They accommodated it. They learned its rhythms and worked within them. They accepted the constraints it imposed and found freedom within those constraints. And in doing so, they developed not just survival skills, but a kind of wisdom, an understanding of how to persist with grace in difficult circumstances, how to maintain humanity in the face of inhuman conditions. That wisdom is part of what we've lost, and part of what these stories might help us recover. Not because we're likely to face the same literal challenges they did, but because the underlying principles apply to any difficult situation. Preparation, community, acceptance of what can't be changed, and determined effort to manage what can. These aren't just winter survival skills, they're life survival skills. And perhaps as you drift towards sleep, wrapped in your own warm coverings, you can carry some small piece of that wisdom with you. The knowledge that difficulty can be endured, that darkness eventually gives way to light, that cold, no matter how bitter, cannot last forever, that the human spirit, properly supported and sufficiently determined, is stronger than we give it credit for. The people in that teepee on that frozen prairie knew this. They lived it. They proved it every single winter night they survived. And we, their descendants, in blood or in species, if not in direct lineage, carry forward what they taught, whether we're conscious of it or not. Sleep well, knowing you're wrapped not just in blankets, but in the legacy of countless people who refused to let the cold win, who persisted, who survived, who made sure that life would continue, that warmth would endure, that morning would come. As the night reaches its darkest, coldest point, usually between 3 and 4 in the morning, the sleeping arrangement inside the teepee reveals its full sophistication. The family is not just a collection of individuals trying to stay warm. They're a thermodynamic system carefully organized to maximize heat retention and ensure that the most vulnerable members receive the greatest protection. This isn't conscious calculation, not something anyone sits down and plans out. It's embedded knowledge practiced so long, it's become instinct. The mother sleeps in the center position, her body serving as the thermal anchor for the two youngest children. The 4-year-old is pressed against her front face, against her chest, breathing the warm air that rises from her body. The infant is between her and the slightly older sibling, creating a chain of warmth where body heat flows from the largest person to the smallest, from the most heat-generating to the most vulnerable. This positioning is critical. Infants and very young children have poor temperature regulation. Their surface area to volume ratio is disadvantageous for heat retention. Left on their own, even in sleeping robes, they could develop hypothermia, even when the ambient temperature is above freezing. But pressed against an adult body, using that adult as an external heat source, they can maintain safe core temperature through even the coldest nights. The mother herself gains benefits from this arrangement. The children's bodies, though they produce less heat than an adult, still produce some, and having them pressed close means she's partially insulated by their presence. More importantly, the psychological benefit is immense. She can monitor their breathing, their movement, their temperature by direct physical contact without having to fully wake to check on them. This is the deep mammalian heritage of human beings, this instinct to cluster together for warmth and safety. You see it in wolf packs, in monkey troops, in countless other species. We like to think we've transcended our animal nature with our technology and culture, but on a night like this, that ancient heritage reveals itself. We're primates who evolved in warm climates, and our primary adaptation to cold has always been behavioral seeking shelter, using tools and clothing, and crucially huddling together. The adolescent boy sleeps slightly away from the family cluster, old enough that he's expected to manage his own temperature regulation, but positioned so he's still within the warm zone created by the collective body heat. He's at an age where he's learning to bridge the gap between childhood dependence and adult self-sufficiency. In a few years, he'll be responsible for his own family, and he's absorbing lessons now about what that requires, including the ability to sleep in less than optimal conditions without complaint. The father sleeps between the boy and the door, the traditional masculine position that places him as the first line of response to any external threat. If predators try to enter, if the wind tears the entrance flap, if anything goes wrong on the perimeter, he's positioned to react immediately. This isn't just about physical protection, it's about psychological security. Everyone else in the teepee can sleep more deeply because they know someone is positioned to intercept danger. The grandfather sleeps in the honored position opposite the door furthest from drafts and closest to the fire's residual warmth. Despite his reduced heat generation due to age, he's positioned in the warmest, most protected spot available. A reversal of what pure survival logic might dictate, but perfect sense in a culture that reveres elders and acknowledges their irreplaceable value as knowledge keepers. Between all of them, arranged strategically, are the warming stones. They've cooled considerably from their original heat, but are still noticeably warm to the touch, providing localized heat where it's most needed. The children have theirs at their feet. The elder has his at his lower back. The adults, needing them less, have allowed theirs to cool more the heat reserved for the young and old. The buffalo robes that cover everyone overlap slightly, creating a continuous blanket of insulation rather than isolated pockets. Where one person's covering ends, another's begins. And at the places of overlap, there's double thickness, extra protection against the cold that's trying to find its way in. This overlapping extends to the robes themselves. Remember, each robe is made from buffalo hide with the hair left on, and that hair creates an insulating layer by trapping air. But when robes are layered with hair against hair, the trapped airspace multiplies, creating insulation far greater than the sum of its parts. It's the same principle modern sleeping bags use with their baffles and chambers, except this was figured out through trial and error thousands of years before we had the science to explain why it worked. The breathing of 7 people creates humidity, warmth, and carbon dioxide. In a sealed space, this would quickly become dangerous. But the tipa's design manages this perfectly. The hide walls breathe, allowing excess moisture to escape without admitting significant cold air. The smoke hole, even mostly closed, provides air exchange. Fresh oxygen enters at floor level through the minuscule gaps inevitable in any hide structure, flows across the living space, warms, rises and exits at the top. It's passive ventilation requiring no energy input, functioning through simple physics. The combined body heat of 7 people, roughly 2,000 watts, might seem like a lot, but distributed across the interior volume of a 16-foot tipi with heat loss through the walls and smoke hole, it's only just barely enough. This is why the positioning matters so much. The heat must be concentrated in the sleeping area, not dissipated throughout the entire space. Around 4 in the morning, the temperature outside reaches its nadir, minus 52 degrees Celsius, minus 62 Fahrenheit. At this temperature, exposed human skin freezes in less than 2 minutes. Breathing causes ice to form in nasal passages. Exhaled breath crystallizes into visible clouds that hang in the air before slowly settling as fine ice crystals. Inside the teepee, this extreme cold makes itself felt. The interior temperature drops slightly, perhaps to 30 degrees. The fire has burned down to the faintest glow, and the decision must be made. Does someone wake to add fuel, or do they trust the remaining coals to last until a more reasonable hour? In this tipi tonight, the decision is to let it be. The coals will provide some heat for another hour or two, and then there will be perhaps 2 hours of the coldest period where the teepee relies solely on insulation and body heat to maintain survivable conditions. It's a calculated risk, but one based on experience. This family has been through worse, and they've properly prepared. The cold, when it deepens, triggers slight changes in the sleepers. Unconsciously, they draw closer together. The breathing becomes slightly shallower, conserving core temperature by reducing the cooling effect of inhaling cold air. The body's peripheral blood vessels constrict, pulling warmth toward the vital organs, and accepting that fingers and toes will be quite cold by morning. This is the body's winter mode, refined over hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. We're not well adapted to cold compared to Arctic animals, but we're not helpless either. The body has strategies, autonomic responses that kick in without conscious thought, designed to keep the core warm, even if it means sacrificing the comfort of the extremities. Despite the cold, despite the physical discomfort, there's something almost beautiful about this scene. 7 people bonded by blood and survival, trusting each other with their lives in the most literal sense. The children trust their mother to keep them warm. She trusts her husband to guard the entrance. He trusts the shelter they've built together. The elder trusts the young ones to carry forward the knowledge he spent a lifetime accumulating. This trust is what makes survival possible. Not just the technical knowledge of teepee construction or fire maintenance or food preservation, but the social knowledge of how to function as a unit, how to support each other, how to make the collective stronger than any individual could be alone. Modern society has tried to replace this kind of trust with institutional systems, insurance policies, government programs. Those have their place, but they're poor substitutes for the deep personal trust that comes from literally depending on each other for survival. The night is not over yet. The coldest hour is upon them, and dawn is still 2 hours away. But they've made it this far. The preparations have held. The knowledge has proved sufficient. The family remains intact, warm enough, safe enough alive. And that's the victory repeated countless times, across generations, the simple triumph of waking up when you went to sleep with no guarantee that you would. The resistance against the cold's attempt to claim another life, another family, another bright spark of human consciousness. The buffalo robes rise and fall with breathing. The coals pulse faintly in their bed of ash. Outside, the stars wheel overhead in their eternal rotation, indifferent to the drama of survival playing out beneath them. Inside, life persists. Stubborn, determined, quietly magnificent life, refusing to yield to the dark and cold, insisting that there will be another dawn, another day, another chance to continue. The ancient human story of surviving, thriving, passing forward. The knowledge and love and determination that makes it all possible. The hour before dawn is peculiar. It's the coldest part of the night, yes, but it's also when a kind of peace descends, a deep stillness that's different from the darkness and wind of earlier hours. Outside, the wind has died almost completely. This often happens just before dawn, as if the atmosphere itself is holding its breath, waiting for the sun's return. The temperature has stopped its fall and sits at its low point, 53 below zero, cold enough that the snow no longer feels like snow, but like fine sand squeaking underfoot if anyone were walking on it. The stars are extraordinarily bright in the clear air, hard points of light that seem closer than they should be, as if the cold has somehow compressed the distance between earth and sky. The Milky Way stretches overhead, the great white road that some tribes believed was the path spirits walked to reach the afterlife. On a night like this, you could almost believe in that. Mythology could almost see the logic in it. Inside the teepee, the family is in the deepest part of sleep, the stage where the brain has surrendered most of its monitoring functions, trusting that the body will manage on its own for a while. This is REM sleep, the dreaming sleep where the mind processes the day's experiences and the unconscious works through problems that the conscious mind couldn't solve. What do they dream about? We'll never know, of course, but we can guess. Perhaps the children dream of summer, of running in warm grass, of the abundance of berries and the excitement of the camp moving to new territory. Perhaps the mother dreams of her own childhood, of the grandmother who taught her to sew, of the skills she's now passing to her daughter. Perhaps the father dreams of the hunt, of the perfect arrow flight, of the moment when the buffalo falls and the family's winter sustenance is secured. Or perhaps they dream of nothing coherent, just the scattered images and emotions that the sleeping brain generates, working through fears and hopes without the structure of narrative. There's no way to know, and in some sense, it doesn't matter. The function of sleep is the same whether dreams are remembered or not. Restoration processing preparation for the next day's challenges. The infant stirs, makes a small sound, begins to fuss. The mother responds without fully waking, shifting position, offering her breast, soothing the child back into sleep. It's a dance they've performed hundreds of times, so automatic that it barely disturbs anyone's rest. The infant nurses briefly, then relaxes back into sleep, satisfied. This small moment speaks to a larger reality. In modern Western culture, we've made sleep into a solitary act, isolated in separate rooms, valuing independence and privacy over proximity. But for most of human history, for these people, and countless others like them, sleep was communal, shared, a collective act of vulnerability and trust. There are benefits to the modern approach, certainly. Privacy, reduced disease transmission, better sleep quality for those who are light sleepers. But there are losses too. The psychological security of proximity, the ease of caring for infants without having to fully wake or leave your own bed. The way children naturally learn to be aware of others, to moderate their own needs against the collective good. The fire's coals are nearly extinguished now, just a faint redness deep in the ash. The interior temperature has dropped perhaps to 28 degrees below freezing, but not dramatically so. And the human bodies and insulating robes are maintaining survival conditions despite the fire's reduction. This is the proof that everything was done correctly, that the shelter and sleeping arrangements can sustain the family even when the fire contribution is minimal. The warming stones have cooled significantly, but are still faintly warm to the touch, still providing some benefit. By morning, they'll be cold, indistinguishable from any other rock except by their position. But for now, they're still doing their job, still fighting the cold with their stored heat. The grandfather shifts in his sleep, making a small sound of discomfort. Age makes sleep harder, makes cold harder, makes everything harder. But he's tougher than he looks, this man who survived 60 winters. He settles back into rest, his breathing returning to the slow rhythm of deep sleep. In about an hour, the very first hints of dawn will appear. Not light exactly, but a lessening of the absolute darkness, a sense that the stars are fading, that the east is preparing for the sun's return. The sleepers won't notice at first. They'll remain deep in rest for a while longer, squeezing out the last hour of the night's restoration. But gradually, as the light increases, as the interior of the teepee begins to be faintly visible, someone will wake. Usually, it's the mother, her brain attuned to the daily cycle programmed by countless mornings to recognize when the night watch is ending. She'll emerge from the robes slowly, carefully, trying not to disturb the children still pressed against her. The cold will hit her immediately, the sharp contrast between the warmth of the sleeping robes and the frigid air of the teepee. She'll breathe out, see her breath fog. In the dim light, feel the deep cold of the ground through her moccasins. But she won't complain. This is simply mourning in winter the price of another day survived. She'll move to the fire first, uncovering the coals that have sustained themselves through the night. She'll add tinder, small twigs, carefully nurturing the embers back into flame. Not a large fire, not yet, because the smoke hole is still mostly closed, and too much smoke would suffocate everyone. Just a small flame to take the edge off the cold, to begin the process of warming the space for the day ahead. As the fire grows, the light it casts will wake others. The father will emerge, We'll check the smoke flaps, we'll begin to adjust them for the day's conditions. The older boy will stir, will rise to help. The grandfather will take his time moving slowly as aged joints allow, but he'll rise too ready to face another day. The children will sleep longest, their young bodies needing rest, their parents allowing them the gift of a few more minutes of warmth and unconsciousness before the day's work begins. But eventually, they too will wake, will emerge from the robes like small animals from a burrow, blinking in the growing light. And then the day will truly begin. Breakfast. A handful of pemmican each, the taste of summer berries in winter, a small miracle. Water from the snow warmed over the fire sipped carefully, planning for the day ahead. Discussion of tasks, the endless maintenance that winter requires. But that's for later. Right now, in this quiet hour before dawn, there's still peace. There's still sleep. There's still the deep rest that the body needs, that the mind requires, that makes all the hardship bearable. Outside, unknown to the sleepers, the temperature is beginning its slow climb. 53 below at its worst, but now 52, then 51, the sun's influence reaching ahead of its visible appearance, the promise of warmth, even when warmth itself is still hours away. The stars are fading. The Milky Way is becoming less distinct. The eastern horizon beyond the prairie's flat emptiness is showing the faintest suggestion of color. Not light, but the promise of light. The hope that this night, like all nights before, it will end. In 7 teepees across a winter camp, similar scenes are playing out. Similar people finding similar rest. Similar fires burning down to similar coals. Similar buffalo robes holding similar warmth. Similar children pressed against similar mothers. Similar fathers guarding similar doors. It's the human story repeated so many times, it becomes almost universal, transcending the specific details to reveal something fundamental about what we are and how we've survived, and why we persist even when everything seems arrayed against us. We endure because we must. We survive because we've learned how. We persist because giving up was never an option. And so we found the ways forward, the techniques and knowledge and social bonds that made possible what seemed impossible. And now, as the night reaches its end, as sleep begins to fade and consciousness begins to return, as the family prepares to face another winter day with whatever it might bring, there's a moment of quiet triumph. They made it. Another night survived. Another dawn arrived at. Another small victory in the endless war against the cold and dark. The mother, half waking, pulls the children slightly closer, feeling their warm breath, their small hearts beating strong and steady. The father, eyes still closed, feels the satisfaction of having guarded his family through another night. The grandfather, drifting in the space between sleep and waking, carries with him the knowledge that he's passed forward everything he can, that the young ones know enough that the chain of knowledge will continue even after his own winter's end. This is the promise of dawn. Not just light, not just warmth, but continuity. The assurance that the struggle will continue, that the knowledge will persist, that the human story will keep unfolding, one winter night at a time, one family at a time, one small triumph of survival after another. Sleep well, knowing that you're part of this story, that the determination these people showed, the skills they mastered, the love they felt for their children and their community, that all of it continues in you, in all of us. We're all descendants of people who survived impossible winters, who refused to give up, who found ways forward when there seemed to be none. Their strength is your strength. Their wisdom is available to you. Their stubborn, magnificent refusal to let the cold win is encoded in your very existence. And so, as you drift towards sleep, as the night claims you and pulls you down into rest, trust that dawn will come. Trust that warmth will return. Trust that the human spirit, properly supported and sufficiently determined, can endure anything. The fire burns low. The breathing slows. The night reaches its end. And somewhere in the east beyond, frozen prairies and snow-covered plains, the sun prepares to rise again, as it has for billions of years. Indifferent but essential, the original source of all the warmth we've ever known, returning once more to make survival possible for another day. Sleep, rest. Tomorrow is coming as it always does, bearing its challenges and its opportunities, its hardships and its small joys. And you, like countless ancestors, before you will rise to meet it. Good night. And so, our journey through this frozen winter night comes to its close. I hope you found some comfort here, some sense of connection to those who came before us, who survived conditions we can barely imagine, with resources we'd consider laughably inadequate. They had no central heating, no synthetic fabrics, no instant communication with the outside world. What they had was knowledge, community, and determination. And somehow, that was enough. As you settle into your own sleep tonight, in your own comfortable bed, perhaps you can carry with you some small piece of what we've explored together. The understanding that difficulty can be endured with the right preparation. The knowledge that warmth comes as much from community as from any external source. The wisdom that accepting reality's constraints rather than fighting them often reveals unexpected paths forward. If you've enjoyed this journey, if these whispers from the past have helped you find some peace tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the channel. We explore forgotten corners of history, trying to find in the past some wisdom for the present. Some comfort in knowing that humans have faced seemingly impossible challenges before and found ways through them. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it in your corner of the world? Are you facing your own winter, literal or metaphorical, that these stories might speak to? Our community spans the globe. And there's something beautiful about the thought that while you're settling into evening rest, someone else might be waking to morning light. But we're all connected by these ancient stories, these timeless truths about human resilience and survival. Share these stories with someone who might need them. A friend who's going through a difficult time. A loved one who can't sleep. Anyone who might benefit from the reminder that our ancestors faced challenges that dwarf our own and found ways not just to survive, but to maintain their humanity, their culture, their care for one another. The people we've spent this night with, they're not here anymore. The specific individuals who slept in that teepee on that frozen prairie, they've been dust for a century or more. But their knowledge persists. Their techniques have been passed forward. Their determination lives on in their descendants and in all of us who draw inspiration from their example. Winter survival skill at its deepest level isn't really about knowing how to build a fire or construct a shelter. It's about understanding that hard times are temporary, that preparation matters, the community sustains us when individual strength fails. These are truths that apply to any winter we might face, any cold season of the soul, any darkness that seems like it will never end. But dawn always comes. Warmth always returns. Spring always follows winter, even when winter seems eternal. Our ancestors knew this with the certainty that comes from having lived it repeatedly, and that knowledge that faith based on experience rather than mere hope allowed them to endure the long nights, to trust in the coming light, to persist through conditions that would break lesser spirits. You carry their strength in you. Their wisdom is available whenever you need it. The fact that you're here listening to this proves that some ancestor of yours survived countless winters, endured unimaginable hardships, refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. That strength is encoded in your very DNA, waiting to be called upon when you need it. So rest now. Let the weight of the day fall away. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let yourself drift into sleep, trusting that tomorrow will come. That warmth awaits, that the struggles of today will be met with the strength of your ancestors and the wisdom of those who've walked this path before. Thank you for spending this night with me, for journeying back through time to a frozen prairie and a family trying to survive in conditions we can barely imagine. I hope you found here some measure of peace, some fragment of wisdom, some connection to the great human story of perseverance in the face of difficulty. Until next time, sleep well, stay warm, and remember, you're stronger than you know, connected to countless generations of survivors, carrying forward a legacy of resilience that stretches back to the very dawn of humanity. The fire burns low. The night deepens. And somewhere in your own safe, warm space, sleep is waiting to claim you. Let it come. Good night, and may your dreams be warm.